morning, friends, and welcome to another First Friday Facebook Live. I'm Taylor, this is Nick.
Howdy.
And we are coming to you from our tropical gallery today. So this tank behind us might look a little bit familiar. Our lovely CEO, Vicki, came to you live on her Harborside chat with Glenn Remick, who is our Director of Project Management, Exhibits, and Planning. And they talked a little bit about planning this tank and its design. But today, we would like to talk to you a little bit more about the fish in this exhibit. We're a little bit excited about this exhibit, so be prepared for us to share a lot about this tank with all of you. So today, we are going to talk, along with the penguins, a little bit about adaptations that these reef fish have that allow them to thrive in their ocean home. So I think to start things off, we got to talk a little bit about adaptations.
I think that makes sense, Taylor, absolutely. Yeah, let's talk about some of the basics. So, what exactly or what even is an adaptation? Well, an adaptation is basically something that an animal has on its body or a behavior that it does that allows it to survive in its own natural habitat. A great example of that would be penguin feathers. And if you guys tuned into our Facebook Live last month, you already had a chance to learn a little bit more about this, but penguins have very interesting feathers. So the inner layer of their feather is very downy and it allows them to trap heat close to their skin, and the outer layer is a little bit more waxy and allows them to stay waterproof. And so it's a very specially adapted feather that penguins have that help them to be able to survive. So that's sort of a great example of an adaptation. But today, even though we're going to probably hear from the penguins a little bit during this Facebook Live.
They're very noisy this morning.
Very noisy. Like Taylor was saying, we're going to focus a little bit more on reef fish, the residents of this beautiful exhibit behind us. I'm going to have trouble focusing on the camera because I just kind of want to do this the whole time and talk to you guys. But I promise I'll stay focused. One of the amazing things about reef fish and reef habitats is the diversity of life that you find living there. One way to think about a reef is to think about a really big city. And I'm sure that a lot of you guys come from a big city, so you can appreciate this. But within a big city, there are so many different types of homes, places to live, and also jobs that people perform that they have to accomplish every day. And they become really good at performing those jobs, become really good at living in those different places. And reef fish, it's the same kind of concept. They will even sort of change their bodies and their behaviors to do their jobs really well and also live in the little nooks and crannies of a reef where they actually do live. This is sort of known as specialization. It takes basically the entire population of fish and other organisms in their own different homes, performing these different functions in their own way to make a coral reef a healthy and a thriving ecosystem, just like our big cities, right, Taylor?
Absolutely.
You guys know there's so many important jobs in the big city that we couldn't survive without them being performed. So just like that, you can think about a coral reef too. Coral reefs are also known as the rainforests of the ocean because of their diversity. There are thousands and thousands of different species that are sharing a relatively small home in comparison to just how many animals are living there. This is in part due to tropical waters, which are very different from our local waters. Tropical waters are very nutrient poor. There aren't a lot of small organisms floating around in the water. There aren't a lot of nutrients running off from the land. That's actually in part what makes tropical waters so clear, which is great for us when we go to visit them because we can see so far underwater and see all the things happening. But that's because they are poor in resources, poor in nutrients. Coral reefs are a little bit like an oasis in the middle of a tropical desert. They provide that place where all these organisms, specifically reef fish, can come to live and find all the things they need to be able to survive. There's structures for algae to grow, shelter for smaller organisms, and when all of these animals are thriving, you have big animals that like to come around and eat the small animals. And so these ecosystems are very tightly tied together. Organisms need each other, but they also need to specialize to be able to live safely within these reef communities and avoid a lot of competition as well. So, adaptations, we could probably spend hours and hours talking about them.
Probably all day, yeah.
That's right, yeah. And we would, so don't challenge us, because we will. But actually, no, we're going to try to simplify it a little bit. We're going to break it into sort of 4 primary categories, make them a little bit easier to digest, and try to also highlight some of the representatives here in this tank that are displaying some of those adaptations so that when you guys come to visit, you can actually look for them. Categories are, number 1, coloration. Number 2, body shapes. Number 3, body structures. Number 4, behaviors. So, without further ado, let's start with coloration, Taylor.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I had never thought about before I worked at an aquarium is why reef fish were so brightly colored. So, have you ever thought about that? Why do you think that reef fish are really brightly colored? Now that you've thought about it for a few moments, you've probably come upon it. It's actually camouflage. So these fish are living in a very colorful habitat. As you can see behind us, the beautiful coral and the tunicates that are making up the hard structures in this exhibit are really bright and colorful. So therefore, the fish who live there also need to be really bright and colorful. It's really important camouflage. So there are some different adaptations of these colors and patterns that we'd like to highlight. My first stop on the coloration journey today, I think, will be false eye spots. So this is an adaptation that you can see on a lot of animals in the wild. In this tank, you'll probably most often notice them on butterflyfish. So a false eye spot, exactly as the name suggests, looks a little bit like a giant eyeball. The reason that animals have these is to fake out predators into thinking that they have that really big eye. And that way, if a predator doesn't see their entire body, they think it's a much bigger animal than it is, and is probably more likely to leave that fish alone. It can also confuse predators into thinking that their eye is on one side of their body when their eye is really on the other side of their body, which can also confuse predators and make it harder for them to catch those fish. So false eye spots, very cool. You can also see these on our epaulet sharks in the Shark in Ray Touch.
Sure can.
Yeah. Sometimes animals have body shapes that allow them to do that role, fulfill their job on the coral reef, like Nick was talking about. Butterflyfish are another great example of this. If you look at our butterflyfish, you'll often notice they have these really long, pointy mouths. And in fact, there's a type of butterflyfish called a long snout butterflyfish. And the reason for this is because of what they like to eat. So they like to eat little small things that grow on the coral. So whether that's the coral polyps themselves, pieces of algae, smaller invertebrates, they need to be able to get into those tight nooks and crannies in order to target their food. So that long pointy mouth allows them to pick away at the coral all day long and really successfully be able to capture the prey items that they're looking for. Speaking of these butterflyfish, sometimes these butterflyfish also have some other cool adaptations, so keep those guys in your mind. We're going to talk a little bit more about them a little further in when we talk about some other stuff.
Sure.
The next form of camouflage is another really cool form, one that might be familiar to you. It's called mimicry. So just like the name would suggest, it's when one animal's coloration or pattern mimics that of another animal. Usually, animals mimic animals that are more dangerous than they are. One of my favorite examples from this tank behind us is a fish called a monocle bream. So breams, when they are small, the juveniles will perfectly mimic the pattern and color of a type of blenny. Specifically a type of fanged blenny, which is a venomous animal. The fanged blennies deliver a really dangerous bite, and so by the monocle bream copying the fanged blennies, they trick predators into thinking that they're much more dangerous than they are, which gives them a better chance of making it to adulthood. Pretty smart.
Yeah.
The next type of camouflage and coloration that I'd like to talk about is probably a little bit easier to explain with a picture, so I happen to have one for you today. This fish here is called the clown triggerfish, and if you look at this fish, and you can see them again in this tank right behind us, you're going to notice they have little spots, they have big spots, they have squiggles, they have stripes, they have all sorts of colors. This type of camouflage is called disruptive camouflage. And as its name suggests, it makes it difficult to tell how many fish I'm looking at. So is this one fish? Is this two fish? Where does this fish's body start? Where does this fish's body end? If I can't figure out what you are or where you are, it's really hard to catch you and eat you. So this is another type of really cool camouflage that you might see in our Indo-Pacific reef tank behind us. So I kind of jumped the gun a little bit and started talking about body shapes because I got really excited about the butterflyfish. But let's talk a little bit more about body shapes and how some of those adaptations allow fish to thrive on coral reefs.
I mean, I think butterflyfish are a great example of
I got
adaptations
excited.
in general,
Yeah.
so it's okay. It's all right. Yeah, no, that's awesome. So, okay, so we just talked about coloration. Now we're going to talk about the next category, like Taylor was describing, body shape. Body shape, that means that an animal's shape has changed or adapted in a way that allows them, again, to perform that job in a very specific, specialized manner that they need to do to be able to survive. Okay, and again, let's start out with the old butterflyfish, right? So Taylor was already kind of hinting about this a little bit, but butterflyfish are omnivorous in that they'll eat some different things, but one of their favorite things to eat is coral polyps. And if you guys know your coral knowledge, or excuse me, if you know your coral basics, then you know that reef corals build a skeleton out of calcium carbonate, and they live inside of that skeleton. For butterflyfish to get close enough to be able to actually eat the polyps, they often have to sneak in between the hard part of the structure that the coral lives inside of. So a lot of them have evolved a very long snout, like Taylor was describing, that allow them to get into those nooks and crannies, get into where the coral polyp actually is, take a bite, and then sort of sneak back away again. Yes, something similar to what you're seeing right here.
I
Yeah.
have a body shape question.
Oh, okay, sure.
Somebody wants to know if a flounder is an example of a body shape adaptation.
Has this person read my script? Because that's what I'm about to talk about next. That absolutely is an example
100%.
of a body shape adaptation. And actually, we're going to talk about that in just a second. So I'll, if you don't mind, I'll hold off on that just for a second, and then we'll hint on flounder in just a minute. Yeah. So butterflyfish again. We love talking about them. They're a great example of all these different types of adaptations. So we talked about the long snout. Let's also talk about their overall shape. One of the funny things about a butterflyfish, Taylor, is if you're looking at them straight on, they look like that. And that's because they are laterally compressed from side to side. It looks like their body has been smushed in a trash compactor like this. Or so. And so this might seem like kind of an odd way for an animal to be shaped, but actually having this laterally compressed body shape allows butterflyfish to swim very quickly and sneak between, again, a lot of those coral branches and other structures that you guys can see in this exhibit. There are actually a lot of great examples right behind us right here of finger corals and branching coral, staghorn, elkhorn coral. And so to get in between all those spaces, and not just to get food, but sometimes for butterflyfish escaping predators, just being able to move around the reef, that lateral compression really helps them out. Now, a flounder, like the viewer was just asking about, is also laterally compressed, but it doesn't swim vertically like this, like a butterflyfish. It swims this way along the bottom, and that lateral compression allows a flounder to kind of stay flat along the bottom, camouflage itself, look for food in that habitat, and also be able to hide from predators as well. Yeah, so that's a great example too.
What about something like a sawfish? Is that an adaptation specifically like the ones you're talking about, or is that something completely different?
That is an amazingly adapted creature, a sawfish, for sure. Sawfish have the lateral compression that we were just talking about, but they also have that extended rostrum with the sort of the teeth off of the side of it. And I'm not sure if I know exactly what that helps them to do. I think in part it helps them to sort of unearth things that they might like to eat in the sand. They can sort of brush it back and forth and move the bomb around and look for things. I don't know, do you know anything else about sawfish that might
I would have to look it up to be more specific. Again,
Yeah.
there are a lot of different adaptations that animals can have, and again, Nick and I are just covering a small fraction of them today because, like we said, we could probably do this Facebook Live
You want us to stretch? We'll stretch
for
it out.
an
We'll stretch it
entire
out.
day.
Stretch it out.
No one wants to hear us talk for an entire day, so we're gonna again try to keep some of those focused topics, so just to highlight a few, but absolutely, the sawfish body shape is an amazing adaptation to, again, a little bit where they're living, which I think maybe brings us to our next fish that we want to highlight and where they're living and their body shape.
Absolutely. And also, if you guys have extra questions too, remember that you can type them in on Facebook, and Taylor and I can try to answer them later on as well too. Yeah, so we were talking about lateral compression. Other good examples, angelfish too. So look for angelfish in this exhibit too. But what Taylor was talking about is that there are some fish that fall under a category that we refer to as oddly shaped. Oddly shaped fish kind of look like how it sounds, really weirdly shaped. Some great examples in this gallery, in the tropical gallery itself, include stonefish and scorpionfish, which have lots of little bumps and little frilly things coming off their body. They're lumpy, bumpy, and frilly, right?
Lumpy,
That's what we came up
frilly,
with. Yeah. That allows them to easily blend in with their habitat, blend in with parts of the coral reef, sponges, tunicates, other things like Taylor was describing that exist on a reef. By having this adaptation, they can hide more easily and avoid predators, but at the same time, it also allows them to hide and potentially ambush their prey. One of the fun things that I like looking for in a tank a little bit down the way, that's called our armored and venomous fish tank, is that sometimes you will see the stonefish hiding in the sand, and literally all you will see are its little eyes sort of poking out of the top of its head. And there are lots of other examples of oddly shaped fish. I think you can talk about a flounder falling under that category as well, being an oddly shaped fish. Okay, so again, to keep things moving along, let's talk about the next category. Taylor's going to talk to us a little bit about body structures that are adaptations.
So one of the fan favorites in this tank is the fish that is probably most affectionately known as the dory fish, but maybe more accurately known as a blue palate surgeonfish or a hippo tang. And one of the really cool body structure adaptations that those fish have is actually what gives them the name surgeonfish. So if you look very carefully at that fish's caudal peduncle, which is a really fun word to say, which is basically the fancy science word for where their tail meets their body, you'll notice that there's a little blade that sticks out on either side of their bodies. Now, surgeonfish are really, really fast-moving fish, so they can make a quick escape if they need to, but if they're in a situation maybe trapped up against the coral reef, they have a second method to protect themselves, and that is that little blade on their tail. So they can actually flick their tail back and forth and actually deter predators from wanting to nibble on them with that quick cut, which is pretty cool. Another animal that we talked a little bit about are triggerfish. So I showed you the picture of the clown triggerfish, but there are a number of species of triggerfish in here. And you might have been wondering why on earth they're called a triggerfish.
I have been.
Yes, I thought so. And the reason is because of one of their body structures. They actually have a little trigger that sticks up on the top of their head. Now this adaptation allows them to actually hold onto the coral and wedge themselves in when they want to rest. So they'll find a nice cozy spot in the coral reef and extend their trigger, which actually wedges them in, which keeps them from getting bounced around while they're resting. It also prevents predators from being able to pull them out of the coral reef structure while they're sleeping, which I think is pretty amazing. You probably won't see the trigger in action too often in this exhibit unless we do have a fish that is resting, but during the day, as you guys can see, most of our fish are cruising around the tank looking for delicious things to eat from the Aquarius to drop in.
That's kind of how I live my day too.
Yeah, cruising around looking for delicious things to eat. Yeah, same.
Yep.
The last body structure adaptation that we'd love to highlight this morning has to do with food as well. And actually, one of Nick's favorite fish.
Oh yeah.
Definitely at the aquarium, maybe in the entire world.
I mean, yeah, pretty much.
Yep. And that is the parrotfish. Parrotfish have many cool adaptations, and I think we'll probably highlight maybe one or two more today. But the name parrotfish actually comes from the shape of their teeth. Parrotfish are actually going after the coral as well, similar to our butterflyfish that we highlighted earlier. They like to munch and crunch pieces of coral, and they have teeth that are fused together that allow them to effectively snap off little bits of coral in order to scrape and eat algae that grows on and around the coral reef. So if you see a parrotfish, they have this really defined beak-like mouth that gives them their name. So that's another really cool body structure that you can see in action in our coral reef tanks here at the aquarium. I think the last one that we like to talk about when we talk about adaptations, so we talked that adaptations are things that animals either have on their body or behaviors that they do. We talked a lot about things that fish have on their body, but maybe not so much about behaviors. So Nick, would you like to highlight some cool coral reef fish behaviors this morning?
From one of the many misbehaving staff members here at the aquarium, yes, I would like to talk about behaviors. Absolutely. Behavior is very important on a coral reef. We've kind of been hinting on the tight relationship between all these animals living together. Sometimes some of them adapt interesting behaviors that might not only help themselves, but might actually help other animals living in that community. And obviously, again, we were talking about how all together they help to keep a community like a coral reef a healthy place. But sometimes those behaviors are a little bit more sort of reference to an individual animal or a couple different animals. So let's talk about some of those interesting adaptations. One of them is one that I bet a lot of you guys have heard of. It's also related to a fish that we have in a couple of our different exhibits here. There's definitely several in this tank right here. They're known as pufferfish. Pufferfish, as a behavior, do just what their name indicates. If they become stressed out, they can puff their body up to 2 or 3 times their normal size. They will take in air and water. Yep. This is also what happens to me after I eat Thanksgiving dinner. They can puff themselves out. Little spines will sort of come up around their body. And obviously for a predator, you're not looking to take a bite out of something that looks like a big ball full of spikes, right? So that's an important behavior for a parrotfish. Allows them to protect themselves. It is a stressful experience for that animal, and I'll just mention this really quick. A lot of people ask us here at the aquarium if we make the puffers puff up. It is interesting to see that, but for a puffer to do it, it's kind of the equivalent of like one of us running a marathon. It's really energetically draining for them and stressful, and so we obviously don't want to put them through that experience. But occasionally you may be lucky enough to see one of them doing that while you're actually here during your visit. Okay, another behavior that allows a fish to protect its offspring has to do with our Banggai Cardinalfish. Banggai Cardinalfish are a species that we have in our living coral exhibit right next to the elevator on the first floor, and they do something called mouth brooding. I know Taylor likes this behavior, it's really interesting.
This one's my favorite.
So, after the females lay the eggs, and actually, I'm going to ask for clarification on this one. Is it the males that hold the eggs? Okay.
Typically, it's dad, yeah.
Okay. Dad will actually collect the eggs, the fish eggs, in his mouth, and he'll protect them until they're ready to hatch. If you get a glimpse of this happening in our living corals exhibit, it sort of looks like the fish is carrying a mouthful of bubble gum because the eggs are pretty good sized and they're usually brightly colored as well. But it's a really interesting behavior. Obviously, hungry animals on a reef will certainly take advantage of eggs as a food source if they're around, and so those Banggai Cardinalfish are giving their offspring an advantage in allowing them to actually have a better chance of survival by protecting those eggs until the eggs are actually ready to hatch out and the larval fish are able to come out. That's not the only species of fish that does that. There are lots of other species of fish that do that, but that's one of the key tropical coral reef fish that we like to talk about here at the aquarium. And then one of the other really interesting behaviors that a fish has adapted to allow it to survive, and actually, this is a service that really helps a lot of other animals on a coral reef. This is performed by typically goby, which is a very small type of reef fish. They set up what we call a cleaning station. It is actually a form of predation, which is kind of funny, but these little gobies will wait for bigger fish to come over, and they will pick dead pieces of skin or parasites off of the larger fish. That provides the goby with a food source, but it also provides the service of cleaning those bigger fish. Sometimes you can even see larger fish like groupers come over and open their mouth really wide, like that, and then the goby will come in and swim inside of their mouth, clean inside, maybe even swim out through their gill openings, through their operculums as well, which is really, really interesting. So this is a great example of a service that not only helps that that little cleaner goby out, but it also helps a lot of the other animals living on a reef as well.
And I will say that one of our large pufferfish in this exhibit, it's a spotted pufferfish. She's often visible up here in this corner, and there is a little goby that likes to hang out also in that corner and will swim all over her, cleaning her. So when you're here at this tank, keep your eyes out in the upper corner of the tank for our pufferfish and that little goby that likes to clean her. It's kind of like a coral reef car wash station.
Yes, that's a great metaphor. Yeah. Okay. So this it feels like we've done a pretty good job of highlighting those 4 major categories of adaptations. What do you say, Taylor?
I think so. Do we have any other questions out there on Facebook Live this morning?
We have one really good question.
Awesome.
If all of these animals have adapted to match the brightness of coral reefs, how does coral reef bleaching from climate change and pollution affect how those animals
We've
thrive?
got some smart viewers out there,
We
man.
have some really, really smart cookies out there. And actually, we were going to connect to this, so thank you for asking that question, because you just made that connection a whole lot easier
That's
for
right.
us.
Yeah.
This is one of the major challenges that coral reef animals are facing right now. They are so specifically adapted to this unique environment that if anything happens to that habitat, it doesn't leave them with a lot of options. And coral bleaching is definitely a major issue, right? When coral polyps are stressed, they expel the algae that lives inside of their body, which turns them white. This does not necessarily mean coral death. We've actually discovered that coral animals are a little more resilient than we had initially thought and can reabsorb that algae. You just got to give them enough time and space to do that. But it can definitely impact the animals that live there in the meantime. And one of the things that we see is animals aren't able to thrive on the coral reef ecosystems because of the health of the coral itself. And camouflage could definitely be one of those primary reasons, because they're really easy to spot against the white backgrounds. So, wonderful, wonderful question. Thank you so much for asking.
Yeah.
Any other questions out there this morning on Facebook Live?
Okay. Well, again, if you guys do have any further questions, feel free to submit them, and Taylor and I will do our best to answer your questions on Facebook itself.
Absolutely. So I think just to wrap up, we have been mostly highlighting the fish in our Indo-Pacific reef tank behind us, but this is by no means the only coral reef tank that you can see here at the New England Aquarium. In fact, we are right across from our giant ocean tank, which features a Caribbean coral reef. A lot of people might not notice that they're looking at reefs that are incredibly different geographically, and that they're actually on the opposite sides of the world from each other. But the animals in both of these tanks look really similar and share many of the adaptations that we were talking about today, again, because of their unique environment. So that coral reef habitat is something that is really special, and the fish that live there are perfectly designed to live on that coral reef. So you will notice a lot of these adaptations that we talked about today in our other exhibits around the building. So when you come, find our coral reef tanks, compare, contrast, see if you can find some of these adaptations we've been talking about today, and see if you can notice if there are any that are different between our Indo-Pacific tank and our giant ocean tank.
Absolutely, yeah. So just to really wrap all that stuff up, we were talking about coral bleaching, and one of the things that causes coral bleaching is something that if you come and talk to an educator here at the aquarium, you will often hear us speaking about, and that's climate change. There are a lot of threats facing coral reefs, but climate change is one of the greatest threats right now. Climate change, we are very confident, has to do with the burning of fossil fuels. When we burn fossil fuels, it produces carbon dioxide, which is a gas that floats up into the atmosphere. It basically creates a heat-trapping blanket around our planet. Us here in New England, we're pretty good at using blankets for sure when it's cold out. But our planet Earth can't just sort of take that blanket off when it gets too warm, and that blanket traps a lot of heat, and that heat has to go somewhere, and one of the places where that heat goes is into the ocean. Now, you heard Taylor and I talking about these warm tropical environments, and for sure, animals that live in these places are adapted to those warmer temperatures, but they are adapted to a specific range of temperature. And even a change in a few degrees can have really drastic impacts. And if the coral itself becomes damaged, becomes bleached, like Taylor was talking about, coral is really the foundation of this ecosystem. And if that goes away, well, it has a ripple effect on all the other coral reef fish and other organisms that are living there. And again, like we've been talking about, they can't just sort of move next door. It's really hard for them to find another place to survive. So what can we do about these problems? Well, first of all, the overall result of all of this is that these become really unhealthy places. They may even shift. All the animals, the coral reef fish that we've been talking about, they may suffer from this experience as well. So we here at the aquarium like to come up with solutions to these problems, right? It can be kind of daunting to think about all the tough stuff that's happening, but there are ways that we can address these problems, right, Taylor?
Yeah, and the good news is you don't have to live near a coral reef to help protect them.
That's right. Yeah.
So one of the solutions that we like to connect to is energy, how we use our energy, where it comes from. So as Vic mentioned, burning of fossil fuels is one of the major contributors to that warming that we were mentioning. And so if you think about it, everybody all over the world, no matter where you're living, uses energy. So we encourage you to figure out how much energy you're using, where your energy comes from. Thank you, Rockhopper Penguins. They really second that one. And to find out what's happening in your own community. Supporting green initiatives in your own communities is a really great way to help ensure thriving communities on coral reefs like the one here behind us. So do a little bit of research, find out what's happening in your home. And if you are ever near our home, please come and check out our beautiful new Indo-Pacific reef tank. We'd love to share it with you. Again, if you have additional questions today, feel free to post those. We will answer them for you. Thank you guys for joining us on another First Friday Facebook Live. We hope to see you again next month, in which we're going to talk a little bit about the aquarium, because we have a birthday coming up, which is pretty exciting. So we'll talk a little bit more about that next month. But again, thank you. We hope you have an awesome day and a wonderful weekend. Thanks, friends.
And come visit us.